In search of Dharma. 1. Defining Dharma.
Dharma, a word almost no one can define without a lot of hand-waving, and almost everyone uses anyway. At its root, it means something very plain, to hold. The interesting thing is how far this plain idea reaches.
The word is everywhere, once you start to notice it. There is a yoga studio in nearly every city called Dharma something, its name said in a tasteful sans serif, over a lotus. Jack Kerouac wrote The Dharma Bums, a science fiction series built a whole mystery around a sinister research outfit called the Dharma Initiative, and nobody in the audience needed the word explained, because we all carry a vague sense of what it conjures, something Eastern, something spiritual, something to do with inner peace and good intentions and candles, and possibly incense. The word arrived in English wearing oriental robes. It sounds like a soft gong in a quiet room. But now try to say what it means, not the mood it gives off, but the actual meaning. Most of us pressed, manage something like your destiny, or doing the right thing, or Buddhist stuff, and then the fog rolls in. It is a word you can use comfortably for years, and never once be able to define. For me, that is an odd thing for a word to be, and it is exactly what made me want to chase it down. Because a word that everyone gestures at, and no one can pin, is usually hiding something, and Dharma, it turns out, is hiding quite a lot. That which holds. Strip a word back far enough, and you reach the moment before it meant anything abstract, back when it still meant a physical thing you could do with your hands. For Dharma, that moment is the Sanskrit root, dri, and what it means is plain and sturdy, to hold, to support, to sustain, to keep from falling. Philologists trace it further back to a Proto-Indo-European root, the reconstructed ancestor of languages ranging from Hindi to English, that conveyed the same sense of holding firm. You can hear the family resemblance in an unexpected cousin, the Latin firmus, stable, strong, which comes down into English as the word firm. Strip away 3,000 years of religion and philosophy, and Dharma means, more or less, that which holds. So the word we imagine as wispy and otherworldly is, at its root, the word for a prop, the beam that keeps the roof up. In the oldest Vedic texts, the hymns of the Rig Veda, it names something close to the order of the cosmos itself, the deep structure that holds reality together and keeps it from collapsing back into chaos. From there, the story is usually told as a smooth broadening, out from the cosmos to society to the single soul. The philology tells it differently, and better. For centuries after the hymns, Dharma was a minor technical word, at home in the rituals of kingship, and barely present in the very texts where a great ethical concept ought to blossom. What made it central, on Patrick Olivell's reconstruction, was an act of appropriation. The Buddha borrowed this royal word to name his new teaching, the Emperor Asoka carved it across India in his edicts, and the Brahmanical schools answered with an entire expert science of Dharma. Only then does the word come to cover the order of society, the conduct of a single person, and the path to liberation. A linguist would file the mechanics under ordinary semantic change. The direction was anything but ordinary. And the metaphor underneath never changes, whether what is being held is the stars or a single human life. In one Jain usage, the word even names a literal physical substance, the invisible medium that makes motion possible. Carried east and then west, it turns into Buddhism, the Dharma, on a paperback spine, and then, in our own century, into the secular Dharma of writers who keep the practice and quietly drop the metaphysics. Each of those shifts was a real event in the life of the word, lawful in its mechanics, unpredictable in its direction, 3,000 years of meaning on the move. A word that has traveled that far is not going to sit still for a tidy one-line definition. So if a Dharma is that which holds, then the question what is a Dharma becomes a question about a function, not a faith. We are no longer asking which doctrine is true. We are asking, what holds a person, or a people, together under the weight of fear, conflict, temptation, and sheer confusion about how to live. Every human group, we will see, grows something to do that holding. We are going to spend 8 parts looking at the astonishing variety of those somethings. There is no the Dharma. If the first oddity was that so wispy a word rests on so solid a root, the second undoes the way the word reached us. In English we tend to say the Dharma, with a definite article and a capital D, as though it named one specific thing, usually the teachings of Buddhism. That usage is real, but it is also late, narrow, and mostly a Western convenience. Go back to the traditions that actually gave rise to the word, and the tidy singular dissolves into a bewildering plurality. In classical Indian thought, there is svabhati, your own dharma, the right way of living that belongs specifically to your role, station, and stage of life. The duty of a soldier is to fight, the duty of a monk is to refrain, and these are not 2 applications of one rule but 2 genuinely different dharmas, each correct for the person whose life it holds. Push deeper into the technical Buddhist philosophy called Abhidharma, and the word splits again. There, dharmas, in the plural, are the tiniest momentary flickers of experience out of which a passing moment is built. Not atoms, the tradition is quick to insist, not little grains of mind stuff, but events, each arising and gone with its conditions. One word is being asked to mean cosmic order, and a person's specific duty, and the fleeting events of consciousness, all at once. No single neat definition can stretch across all of that without tearing. This is not a flaw in my research, it is the central fact. There is no single the Dharma, in the way there is a single Mount Everest. There are dharmas, plural, many of them, suited to many different lives and worlds. The moment this is accepted, a door opens that the rest of this book can walk through. If a dharma is simply a culture's worked-out answer to, how should we live, and what holds us together while we do, then dharmas are not the property of the East, or of religion, or of antiquity. A secular philosophy can be a dharma. A people's unwritten code can be a dharma. So for that matter, can the great monotheisms, and the ethics of a profession, and the half-conscious creed of a subculture. None of them sits automatically above the others. That refusal to rank them in advance is the stance I take throughout. Secular and sacred, written and spoken, all treated as equally real candidates. It falls out directly from the plurality the word has carried all along. And an important word of housekeeping, because it governs everything that follows. From here on, the word Dharma is simply a placeholder. The thing this book is about is the concept, the answer to how should we live, that every culture builds and names in its own tongue, or builds and never thinks to name at all. Ubuntu is not a translation of Dharma, nor Mart, nor the Tao. Each is a people's own word for their own instance of the thing. I keep the Sanskrit label because, of all the candidates, it is the one whose root says most plainly what the thing does. Where this project traces the word's history, it is studying a specimen, not consulting an owner. Why everyone has, at least one. If dharmas are this varied, and nobody coordinated them, why do they turn up everywhere? Why does every human society, left to itself long enough, grow some worked-out answer to how its people should live, and to what holds them together while they do? You might expect, given how different cultures look on the surface, that some peoples would simply do without. But none do. The reason is one of the most robust findings in the science of human behavior. Start with the problem every group has to solve. Together, people accomplish vastly more than they manage alone, but every act of cooperation leaves an opening. The cheat, the free rider, the person who pockets the benefit and dodges the cost. A group with no defense against exploitation gets eaten from the inside. Our species' answer, shaped over a very long time through both genes and culture, was a comprehensive toolkit for holding cooperation together. Reciprocity, reputation, gratitude, guilt, a keen eye for unfairness, and a powerful instinct to learn and enforce the local rules. Morality, in this light, is not a coat of paint over a selfish animal. It is the social technology that lets the animal cooperate at scale, without being destroyed by its own cheats. And we have been at it for an extraordinarily long time. For at least 15 million years, our hominy ancestors lived in social groups, which means that for 15 million years, the most important and most dangerous feature of any individual's world was other members of the same species. Allies to be kept, rivals to be handled, cheats to be caught before they bled the group dry. The physician and social scientist Nicholas Christakis argues that this endless social pressure pressed a kind of social sweet into the human grain, a reliable bundle of tendencies toward cooperation, friendship, in-group loyalty, and learning from one another. It surfaces in every society because it was shaped long before any of those societies existed. A dharma, on this reading, is never written onto a blank slate. It is a culture's particular way of organizing, naming, and fine-tuning a set of social instincts the species already arrived with. The evidence that this is universal is strong, though it requires careful handling. The anthropologist Donald Brown assembled a catalogue of human universals, features found in every documented society with no known exceptions, and reciprocity, fairness, and a sense of right and wrong sit squarely on it. More recently, the researcher Oliver Scott Curry tested the idea directly, combing the ethnographic records of 60 different societies for 7 cooperative rules: help your family, help your group, return favors, be brave, defer to your superiors, divide things fairly, and respect others, property. No single society showed all 7, and his critics, who include the anthropologists who staged a formal debate against him, have picked hard at the counting. But of the several hundred moral judgments his team coded, all but one pointed the same way, and in no society that anyone has yet examined do the rules run in reverse. None was found is not the same as there are none. Still, as a first pass over the species, it is striking. The content of morality varies enormously, but the cooperative spine, so far as anyone has looked, does not. And it is the spine, to be exact, that the evidence shows to be universal, the moral machinery itself, not any full architecture built upon it. How far a people elaborates that machinery into something comprehensive, named, and examined, a dharma in the strong sense I will mark out shortly, varies from case to case, and is a matter of degree rather than kind. The trick to holding universal and wildly varied together at once comes from biology. Nico Tinbergen, who studied animal behavior, taught that among the questions you can ask about any trait, 2 stand sharply apart: what is it for, and how is it built? The evolutionary biologist, David Sloan Wilson, applies exactly that split to morality, and it resolves our puzzle cleanly. The function of a dharma is nearly always the same: to sustain cooperation and hold the group together. But the mechanism that delivers that function can be almost anything: a sense of duty, a fear of divine punishment, a code of honor, the Indian idea of dharma, the Southern African idea of Ubuntu. One job, many tools. That is why dharma-shaped frameworks keep being reinvented by people who have never met. They are local solutions to a problem that every human community faces. Written across the sky. You can even see the same impulse manifest on the scale of the cosmos. Many great civilizations, often independently, reached for a grand idea of order, a single principle fusing the heavens, society, and right conduct. India had Rita, the deep rightness of things, a word the philologists prefer to render as truth. Ancient Egypt had Ma'at, truth and balance set against chaos, weighed against your heart after death. The Zoroastrians of Persia had Asha, so close a cousin of Rita that the two are in effect the same word in different mouths, and in the oldest poetry the two peoples share, reaching back some 4,000 years, what one did to that truth was hold it up. The upholding of Rita is among the most ancient formulas we can recover, and the verb in it is dharma's own root. The Greeks had logos, the rational order of things; the Chinese had the Tao, the way; the Romans and the Christians after them had natural law. The cosmologies could hardly be more different. The underlying intuition reads the same every time, that reality has a grain, and that the good life means going with it rather than against it. It is the intuition from which the very word Dharma was built. That which holds, written across the sky. Those grand orders are not all the same kind of thing though, and one difference among them matters a great deal for where we are heading. Most of them, Ritta Ma'at, the Tao, natural law, treat the order as something discovered, a structure already woven into reality that we are obliged to find and obey. The Greeks characteristically also kept a word for the opposite idea, nomos, the order that is made, the conventions and laws a society agrees on and could have arranged otherwise. Dharma sits in a revealing spot between the two, though not for the reason I expected to find. The tidy story, the one I began with, has the Indian tradition splitting the job in half. Ritta above, naming the impersonal order of the cosmos, Dharma below, applying it to a particular human life. Read the philologists, and that staircase wobbles, the two words rarely so much as appear together in the old texts, and the neat division of labor turns out to be largely a modern gloss. What seems to have happened is stranger, and for this book, more useful. The old truth word died out of the language altogether, and Dharma, the king's word for what a throne upholds, was borrowed, by the Buddha, to name his teaching, by the Emperor Asoka, for the ideology of an empire, by 19th century Hindu reformers, for a universal ethic, by 21st century secularizers, for a practice with the metaphysics set gently to one side. Dharma travels well not because it was built loose, but because it has been so often, and so successfully refounded. Nor is it unique in this. Even natural law, woven though it was into the mind of God, was eventually secularized by jurists who kept the law and lost the lawgiver. Aquinas himself had left a lower story lit by natural reason. What Dharma has is a longer record of removals, none of which demotes the upper story. For most of the word's history, and for millions of practitioners now, the cosmology is the point. But it does mean that a phrase like secular Dharma is not the contradiction it first appears to be. It is the newest borrowing in a very old series, and the series itself is the strongest evidence we will meet that Dharmas are made. It is also worth being clear about what did the traveling. The concept needs no vehicle, every people reinvents it unprompted, as this whole section has been showing. What traveled was a word, one culture's label for the thing, passed from hand to hand and refounded at each stop. This book borrows it in exactly that spirit, and holds it just as lightly. Custom, law, and the things a Dharma is not. By now you may be feeling a reasonable suspicion. If a Dharma can be a religion, a philosophy, or a people's unwritten code, and if the impulse behind it is universal, then hasn't the word swollen to mean simply human values? A word that means everything, means nothing. If Dharma is going to bear the weight of this whole book, the word needs a boundary, some way of distinguishing what is a Dharma from what merely looks like one. The boundary is not about content. There is no single belief or rule you can point to and say that is what makes it a Dharma. It is about a combination of features, and the cleanest version I found runs to 4. The first is comprehensiveness. A Dharma governs a whole life, or a whole domain of life, rather than a single slice of behavior. It has something to say about work, speech, money, family, authority, suffering, and death. It is an architecture, not a single rule. The second is that it is identity constituting. A Dharma binds you from the inside, by conviction and identity, rather than from the outside, by force. It also works to remake you, telling you who to become, and offering the practices, habits, disciplines, rituals, to get you there. The third is an orientation toward the good. It is about how one ought to live. The classical Indian tradition drew that line itself, between Dharma, the ethical path, and Artha, the business of getting and keeping worldly advantage. And the fourth is reflective self-awareness, the one that will matter most once we meet Dharmas being built on purpose. A Dharma can be held up and known as a path, something a person or a people can name, examine, and deliberately choose or reform, rather than merely absorbed as the way things obviously are. Two pieces of fine print belong here, before the test is put to work. Both are fingerprints of the kind I defend at this part's end. First, the scoring. Oriented toward the good means the good, as the Dharma's own carriers conceive it. The feature marks the register of ought off from the register of advantage, the line the Indian tradition itself drew between Dharma and Artha. It does not ask whether the conception is in fact any good. That question gets a part of its own much later, and keeping it out of the definition is deliberate, because Part 6 will need to call some genuinely dark things dharmas, without the definition ejecting them first. Likewise, the fourth feature names a capacity. Most dharmas are absorbed half-consciously and never feel chosen, and what marks them is that they can be held up and examined. Second, the provenance. The research note behind this part carries a different fourth feature, a transformative telos, the who to become, which this version folds into the second feature, freeing the fourth slot for reflective self-awareness precisely because the end of this book will need it. That is a choice, made by me, for a purpose you can now see coming, and I flag it so that no one following the links mistakes it for a finding. Run the everyday imposters against those previous four features, and you can see why they fall short. Custom. The way a village does things supplies rules, but it is usually inherited without reflection, and carries no transformative aim. It tells you what is done, not what is good and why. Law is comprehensive and powerful, but it binds the wrong way, from the outside, by coercion, enforceable by punishment, and abolishable by a vote. Repeal a statute, and it is simply gone. A dharma is not undone so easily, because it lives in conviction rather than on a statute book. Etiquette governs only the polished surface of conduct, which form of address, and asks nothing of your soul. The hardest case is ideology, which, like a dharma, is comprehensive, and fuses values with a story about the world, and plenty of ideologies sincerely offer their adherents transformation, sacrifice, discipline, and identity to grow into. Nor can the difference be purity of motive, since dharmas have served power often enough. The word itself began in the rituals of kingship, and Asoka carved it across an empire. What separates them is center of gravity. An ideology is organized first around political mobilization, the winning and wielding of collective power. A dharma is organized first around the formation of persons, and carries that distinctive layer of inner practice, meditation, prayer, training, that an ideology can do without. The line is real, but it is the blurriest of the four, and traffic crosses it in both directions. A dharma curdles into an ideology when it is captured by power, and an ideology starts to look like a dharma the moment it begins telling its followers who to become. You may have noticed that this test has soft edges, and those edges are part of the design. Membership in a category like this is a matter of degree rather than a clean yes or no. Just as a magpie is somehow a more obvious bird than a penguin or an emu, some dharmas are textbook cases, and others sit out near the blurry rim. Buddhism, Stoicism, and Ubuntu carry all four features in full, and the test admits them without a wobble. But what about environmentalism, with its values, its disciplines of consumption, its story about humanity and nature, and its converts who genuinely reorganize their lives around it? What about the ethos of a demanding profession, medicine, or the military, that tells its members who to become, and drills them, until they are it? What about a subculture like punk, with its code and its refusals? Run the four features over each of these, and you will find them scoring 2 or 3 out of 4, hovering right at the threshold. I do not think there is a hidden fact that settles such cases, and chasing one would lead us away from what matters. The features are a tool for seeing family resemblance, not a border guard stamping passports. What they let us do is compare, to notice that a profession, a religion, and a peasant movement can be doing recognizably the same work, holding a life together in recognizably the same way, even when one of them would never dream of calling itself a dharma. A definition is a tool, not a truth. I have just handed you a 4-part definition, and I want to immediately complicate it, because the most interesting thing I learnt in defining Dharma is something about definition itself. Words like this one resist being pinned, and not by accident. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein made the point with the humble word game. Try to find the single feature common to all games. Board games, ball games, solitaire, a child spinning in a circle, the Olympics. Competition cannot be the common thread, because solitaire has none. Skill cannot be it, because snakes and ladders needs none. Fun cannot be it, because the professional has come to dread the game he plays for a living. There is no single feature that runs the whole length. Instead there is, in his phrase, a complicated network of similarities overlapping and crisscrossing, a family resemblance. Such a concept is held together not like a single thread but like a rope. Its strength comes from many short fibers twisted together, no one of which runs end to end. Dharma is a rope. Though one fiber, it must be said, runs remarkably far, the scholars who catalogue the word's Buddhist senses find nearly all of them still carrying some scent of support, of holding in place. A rope then, but a rope with one long strand near its core. That is why the question scholars of the word learned to ask was never, what is Dharma? A demand for the one true essence, but what makes something a Dharma? A question about family resemblance. There is a further wrinkle. The philosopher W. B. Gallie noticed that certain words, art, democracy, social justice, are more than vague, they are essentially contested. The argument about what they really mean is not a problem to be solved, but a permanent feature of the concepts themselves. People will still be disagreeing about the true meaning of justice in 1,000 years. That endless disagreement is part of what the word is. Dharma belongs in that company with one caution attached. Gallie's own test asks whether the rival users are at least contesting the same prize, heirs of one acknowledged exemplar, and the Vedic ritualist, the Abhidharma scholastic and the secular meditator, are not obviously doing that. Within a single tradition, Dharma is contested exactly as Gallie described. Across the whole plural field, it is less a disputed trophy than the rope of the last paragraph. So when I offer you those 4 features, I am offering a tool, a deliberately sharpened version of a fuzzy word, cut to a particular purpose, which is to let us compare very different ways of living without collapsing them into one. A definition on this view is less like a true statement, and more like a map, useful precisely because it leaves things out, and judged by whether it takes you where you need to go. There is a third and harder version of the objection, and it deserves to be met at full strength, because it comes from inside the discipline this whole project leans on. The anthropologist Gallie and Asad argued, in a famous critique, that there cannot be a universal definition of religion, and not merely because the word is fuzzy, because any such definition is itself the historical product of discursive processes. The very urge to lift a single functional category out of the world's ways of living grew out of a specific Christian and then secular European history, and it has served administration and empire at least as often as understanding. Every word of that critique applies to what I am doing with Dharma. Part 6 will show how the 19th century manufactured the very containers called world religions, and then forgot they were manufactured. On Asad's terms, I am manufacturing another. The only response I have found is to disarm the thing that makes it lethal, which is concealment. A definition does its damage when it poses as a discovery. Mine is offered as a tool with the toolmaker's fingerprints left on it, chosen by a particular person, out of a particular history for a stated purpose, to be judged by the work it does, and discarded where it fails. And candor, I should admit, buys less than it seems to. Confessing a genealogy does little to disarm it. What actually answers Asad is that a tool of this kind can be tested. Its claims can fail against the world, and one failure above all wants watching for. Define a Dharma by the work it does, and you will find one in every society you look at, because the finding is packed into the definition. That is why the universality claim 2 sections ago was offered as evidence, counted societies and their published critics, and not as a consequence of my 4 features. What cannot be claimed after Asad is innocence. What can be claimed is authorship, on the record, and a willingness to be marked wrong. And the question he forces is not, is the definition true, but, for what work, for whom do we need to stabilize this word at all, and what plurality do we put at risk by stabilizing it? This is the method of the whole undertaking. Faced with a drifting, contested, 3,000-year-old word, the tempting move is to plant a flag and declare what Dharma really means. The appropriate move, the one I will try to keep faith with, is to map its uses instead, to lay out many dharmas, with their contexts and their tensions intact, and resist flattening them into a single official version. That will matter enormously when, near the end of this journey, we ask whether a machine could be taught human ethics at all, or whether teaching it would simply crush the plural into a single average, and call the result the truth. 2 questions I'm leaving open. By now, 2 objections are probably forming, and rather than answer them now, I am going to name them and deliberately leave them standing, because they are the twin destinations the whole argument is heading for. The first is about authority. I have defined a dharma as something that binds you from the inside, by conviction rather than by force, but I have also said a dharma need not rest on any god. So a sharp question follows. Without a divine lawgiver behind it, can a dharma really bind you at all? Or is a godless dharma just a set of personal preferences wearing the costume of duty? It is the oldest question in ethics. Plato was already turning it over in a dialogue called the Euthyphro 2,500 years ago, and the trap he set there for the divine lawgiver has never been cleanly escaped. I think there is a real answer. But we will face it properly when we reach the modern, secular, God-haunted world, several parts from now. The second is about judgment. If dharmas are genuinely plural, and none automatically sits above the others, then are they all equally good? When a dharma is cruel, or cages half its people, or feeds a death camp, am I really reduced to shrugging that it is simply their way? The worry is serious enough that I do not want it festering for 8 parts. Plural is not the same as anything goes. To say there is no single true dharma is not to say that every dharma is as good as every other, any more than admitting there are many good languages means every sentence is true. There is a flaw, and some dharmas fall through it. But building that flaw, honestly, without smuggling in my own culture's furniture, and calling it the universe, is delicate work, and it belongs at the end of the road, not here. The most ordinary thing in the world. So what did I find, going to look for the meaning under the fog? I found that the word we treat as exotic is, at its root, the plainest word imaginable, that which holds. I found that there is no single dharma, but a teeming plurality of dharmas, secular and sacred alike, none of them granted the high ground in advance. I found that every human society grows one, because every human society faces the same problem of how to cooperate without being torn apart, and a dharma is the characteristic human solution. And I found that dharma is best treated as a tool, a map we draw for a purpose, holding the plurality open rather than freezing it shut. Which means the thing we have been taught to see as far away and faintly mystical is, in fact, the most ordinary thing in the world. You are standing inside a dharma right now, some inherited, half-examined account of how to treat people, and what a good life looks like, whether or not you have ever given it a name. Almost everyone is. The interesting question was never whether you have a dharma. It is which one or which ones, where it came from, how it got inside you, and whether it deserves to keep you. We have a working definition and a plural, unprivileged field to explore. The very next question is the obvious one. If dharmas are made rather than handed down from the sky, where do they actually come from? What is it about being human that makes us build these things, over and over, wherever we appear? To answer that, we have to go and watch one being born, back past the philosophers and past the scriptures, to the first crowded cities, where the ancient social instincts we just met were made to hold together more strangers than they had ever faced.